Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya. Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. 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 Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna. Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Bolo. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Oh, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Oh, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hariba, 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 Gaura Hariba. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki jai, Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Nitai Gaur Pramanandi, Hari Hari Bo.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So on behalf of ISKCON, Bhaktivedanta Manor and School of Bhakti, we'd like to give a warm welcome to everyone assembled here for this special 3-day series of programs with His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu. Hari Bol. So this is a very special program series, and it's actually in conjunction with School of Bhakti with, of course, the Golmatsya initiative, which is obviously all fully geared towards trying to distribute Bhagavatam everywhere and anywhere, really following the whole maxim of every town and village, not just in Britain, but all over the world. And so obviously we have Radhika Raman Prabhu with us. He's a wonderful devotee, a very distinguished speaker. So I'm not going to embarrass Prabhu too much, but I'll just share a few things on Prabhu. So he's actually, I mean, you could say he's a child prodigy. He was born into a devotee family. He was raised on the Bhagavatam. And through the Bhagavatam, he actually himself has credited learning a lot of his critical, analytical thinking skills, which he put to good use in the field of education. He actually enrolled at university at the age of 13 in America. And from there, he actually went on to do degrees in philosophy and mathematics, as well as receiving the university's highest honor. He went on to enroll at University of Oxford at the age of 17. Like who goes to university at 17? And Oxford on top of that. And obviously went on to, attaining a lot of success there. And he's one of those combinations of someone who's very spiritual, very spiritually advanced, full of devotion, but also has incredible mature ability as well, and using it to share Krishna consciousness in the field of academia, amongst the intellectuals, as well as developing our Krishna conscious congregation and yatras all over the world. He does wonderful lectures, seminars, is a writer. And Prabhuji, as you can imagine, is very busy, but he took time out of his busy schedule to come here to the UK, to the manor, to spend time with us, giving us these gatha on the Bhagavatam. And of course, he'll be also giving morning class tomorrow and the day after. So please, in manor style, please give 3 loud Haribols for His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu. Haribol! 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 His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu ki! So I'm going to hand over to Prabhuji now. It's, as you know, it's a 3-day seminar starting today, tomorrow, and on Sunday on the glories of the Bhagavatam, and specifically looking at the Bhagavatam's lessons on forgiveness. Hare Krishna. And for those of you who know, online this is being streamed on School of Bhakti YouTube. So obviously those are welcome to all of you who are watching online. And for those, you can also spread the message to others that you can check this out online as well. Hare Krishna.
That kind introduction. It's actually, it's been a long time since I've come back to Bhaktivedanta Manor. I studied here from 1999 to 2005 in England. And and then maybe came back once since then. I was told 2010. So it was actually quite a emotional experience seeing Radha Gokulananda again, and Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman, and many wonderful devotee friends from many years ago. And as Prabhu said, I was 17 when I first came to England. So I guess my most formative years as a young adult, or someone becoming an adult, which are, as you know, very impressionable years, were here at Bhaktivedanta Manor, which was my spiritual home for a number of years. And so it's very wonderful to be back, and my gratitude especially to Divyanam Prabhu for inviting me to come and organizing my visit and hosting me wonderfully, him and his family, Vrindarika, Ramaya, and their wonderful children. I'm very grateful to all of you for coming here, and to the School of Bhakti in particular for hosting this 3-day seminar. Welcome to you in person, the live studio audience, and then also those on online. So, what I'd like to do for these 3 days is I want to start with some introductory remarks about Srimad Bhagavatam from a scholarly or academic perspective, what makes it such a special book, and then focus specifically on the theme of forgiveness. We'll kind of do a tour of Srimad Bhagavatam following this theme of both giving forgiveness and seeking forgiveness. So in both directions, when we have to forgive and when we have to ask for forgiveness. So it's a wonderful theme. Bhagavatam has so much to say about it, and we'll look at it from both of those aspects. So today I want to focus, like I said, some basic themes, remarks about Bhagavatam itself and its significance, and then looking particularly on the idea of Krishna's forgiveness, forgiveness as a quality of the Lord, as a way to inspire us to then embody, to imbibe that quality ourselves. So today's focus, Bhagavatam in general, and then Krishna's quality of forgiveness in particular, and the need for forgiveness for all of us. Tomorrow, then, it's going to be focused on seeking forgiveness, how the Bhagavatam actually provides a very consistent guidebook for how we seek forgiveness, because it happens so many times in Srimad Bhagavatam. I mean, so many times devotees seek forgiveness from others, that there's actually some very consistent themes that emerge when we look at all of those accounts. That'll be tomorrow, and then the day after is going to be in the other direction, is forgiving. When someone has wronged us, then how do we forgive? How do we get ourselves to forgive? And that's, that again, there's plenty of wonderful stories in Bhagavatam. So this is a seminar on the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam, but the theme that will guide our journey through the Bhagavatam, our exploration, is on this theme of seeking and giving forgiveness. Okay, so that's kind of the structure for today, tomorrow, and the day after. If it turns out that you don't have to ever seek forgiveness from anyone in your life, you can skip tomorrow. And if you're in a situation where you never have to forgive anyone because no one ever does anything wrong to you, you can skip Sunday, okay? But otherwise, all 3 days, I think, are going to be essential. So, Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. So the Bhagavatam is a really special book, okay? And we know this, of course, many of us, I think, in this audience, because we've encountered Bhagavatam before. We may even read it regularly. But the Bhagavatam is significant, it's important from a variety of perspectives. And one of these has to do, is historical in nature. There are 3 books that have had a significant impact, that have really shaped the history of India, South Asia, and from there the history of the world. And those 3 very influential works are the Mahabharata, including, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, and the story of Lord Ram in all its different languages and different forms, and thirdly, Srimad Bhagavatam. And they have shaped the course of world civilization. They're really world classical literature, because they have impacted not just the rarefied circles of scholars and philosophers, like some books. They haven't just impacted popular audiences, like some books. They've really, the impact of these works has really spanned the spectrum of human culture and civilization, everything from philosophy to literature to dance, drama, music. For the past, I don't know now, maybe 6 or 7 years, Krishna Kshetra Maharaj and myself have been leading a Bhagavatam research project, which aims to bring scholars from around the world who study Srimad Bhagavatam professionally, academically, from various aspects, from various angles of vision. And some of them are scholars of music and dance, and some are scholars of philosophy, and some are specifically literary poets, right? And each one looks at Bhagavatam and appreciates it. Another person is working on Bhagavata from looking at the illustrated manuscripts of the text. So before the age of the printing press, every work had to be copied by hand, right? And as you copy it by hand, of course, the text is there. But just like we enjoy today, back then also people appreciated having art in their books. And so those who had the resources to fund this type of book creation, a lot of times kings and rich merchants, they would pay an artist to produce these beautiful, beautiful paintings illustrating different leelas interspersed in the text, in the handwritten text of the Bhagavata. And these are found in manuscript libraries in different parts of the globe. And they found their way in libraries in the United States, in England, and the British Library, for example, in Nepal, largely because people in colonial times used to find these manuscripts, and often they would be sold page by page for money, and so they get scattered in different parts of the world. So one of our scholars on the team is studying these dispersed manuscript pages and looking at specifically on the illuminations, the artwork found there. And it's incredible, the artwork that Bhagavatam has inspired, different styles of art from different parts of India and different periods. So it's really the Bhagavata's impact, and this is not the topic of today's seminar, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's really extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. You can walk into any part of India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Southeast Asia, and you can find historical examples of the Bhagavata's impact on local culture and history. The oldest layer of Cambodian art, the earliest example we have of art is a statue of Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan in his famous pose as Srinathji. And this is, many centuries old, I forget now, 13th century or something like that. And it's a clear example of the impact of Krishna Lila and of the Bhagavatam more generally in that part of the world. So it's really shaped civilization and now, thanks to the work of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, the Bhagavata has impacted the course of world civilization and really become a classic of world culture. This word classic, the word classic is, we use it quite regularly, but it has a very specific meaning. What is considered a classical work of literature? And there's one professor at the University of Chicago who's described or tried to define the idea of what makes something a classic of literature. And anyone have any thoughts or suggestions? What makes something a classic? What would you say it is? Just call it out, and I'll repeat what you say. Yeah. Yes. So something that stands out in its class, but also stays. Sundaranand Prabhu is saying it stays current for a long period of time. So it stands the test of time. And this is one of the characteristics that he gives. Good. What else? Sorry? Evoking human experience. It's okay. This is just a quick poll of the audience, and I'll keep repeating so people online can hear. So yeah, it evokes human experience. It touches, it connects with who human beings are and what our experiences are. So we might say in a word, relevance, right? A work of classical literature is one that is perpetually relevant, to combine both of the points that you made. Yes? Yes. Yes, excellent. So timeless, always relevant, perpetually speaks to the human experience. Yes, excellent point. Great point. Something that influences other works, right? So we've been talking about this in relation to the Bhagavata, how it impacted other works, written works. There's a whole, there are literally thousands of works that are impacted by Srimad Bhagavatam or direct renditions of the Bhagavata. And what's interesting is that the Bhagavata is written in Sanskrit. These works, when they're derived from the Bhagavata, they become classics in their own regional languages. So Sri Krishna Vijay in Bengali by Gunraj Khan is a classic of Bengali literature. The Bhagavata of Eknath is a classic in Marathi. Potana's Bhagavatamu is a classic of Telugu literature, right? So a classical work impacts other works, and then it becomes a classic in its own right. Those works become classics in their own right. Such is the caliber of the children that a classical work produces. I'll add one more to that, which is that it also spans geography. So it's not just relevant to one region, one linguistic tradition, one cultural background. A classic speaks globally. It speaks wherever it touches. There's something universal about its reach, that it touches the heart. You know, if you think about the works of Shakespeare, for example, they're not just interesting to the English. They have impacted everyone from India to China to South America, everywhere. And in their own languages, people read it and appreciate it. And then they study English so that they can study Sanskrit, so they can study Shakespeare, right? The work draws people to that language. So strong is the desire to study the work in its original. So this description of a classic is essentially a description of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam has stood the test of time for thousands of years, and across that time period has spawned other works that are directly derived or indirectly derived in written form or in performance or in the fine arts that are directly inspired by the Bhagavata. It's impacted around the world throughout its history, just recently in the Western world, but before that across different parts of Asia. And there's one last thing that this scholar says, which makes something a classic, and I think is very interesting. He says a classic is a work that overflows with meaning. Overflows with meaning. What does that mean? That you can't contain and define the meaning and say, okay, now I know what it says, I'm done with it. Just like, if you were to pick up a travel guide to China, you would read the travel guide, you would get what you need from it, you would carry it on your visit to China, and then you're done with it, right? I mean, you don't keep reading it every day and trying to get something deeper from it. No, it says the hotel is here and this is a good quality hotel and that's it. There's nothing more you're going to gain from it by reading it over and over and over again. A classic work is one that no matter how many times you read it, there's always more to be gained from it. Their fresh meaning is always revealed from it. No one has ever in the history of the world said that I read Bhagavad Gita, got what I needed from it, and now what else? Right? Everyone's read it over and over and over again. And you keep reading it, and to this day, after decades of reading it, you look at it again and go, how did I miss that? Right? That's really profound. Why? Probably because you've changed in the meantime, right? There's something else you need to hear, and therefore you hear it, right? Because these books are living, and so they speak to us at different times in our life. There's one very nice example of this in Bhagavatam, this aspect of what makes something a classic. Bhagavad Gita was, of course, heard by Arjun in the battlefield of Kurukshetra just before the battle began. And at that point, Arjun wanted to not fight, retire to the forest, and live a life of detachment. And Krishna's message in the Gita is, no, your duty as a kshatriya is to fight. You should do so, but do it for me. And so he picks up his bow at the end of the Gita and he fights. Now, after the battle is over and Maharaj Yudhishthira is coronated king, and they all, things are peaceful again, and it's time for everyone's departure, particularly Krishna's departure. And Krishna leaves this world, and Arjun comes back with this news to King Yudhishthira in Hastinapura. And Arjun, of course, is heartbroken. He's devastated because the Lord has left. The Bhagavatam says that Arjun, as he's feeling separation from Krishna, the only way to give himself solace is to remember the instructions that Krishna gave him on the battlefield, namely Bhagavad Gita. And as he remembers those instructions over and over again, he and his brothers, the Pandavas, develop the determination to leave the palace, coronate their grandson, Parikshit, as king, leave the palace, go to the Himalayas to renounce the world. Now think about it. That same instruction that Arjun received those many decades ago, at that time, inspired him to do what? To fight. He wanted to go to the forest. He'd like to go to a cave in the Himalayas, and instead those instructions gave him a very clear message, which was, no, you're not going to the forest, you're going to stand here and fight. A few decades later, he's remembering the very same instructions, and what is the lesson he gets from it? Go to the forest, go to the Himalayas. The very opposite of what he was supposed to do earlier. Right? So this is the point, right? An overflow of meaning. The same work can speak to us at different times, at different stages in our life, depending on what we need to hear at that time and what benefits us most and what we are craving for. Where we are at in our relationship with Krishna, we'll find that in the book at that time. And this is why it's a mine that never empties of gold. It's a well that never stops giving water, never dries up. It's a gift that always keeps giving because it's a classic, right? It's overflowing with meaning. The Bhagavatam has around 90 different commentaries in Sanskrit. That is an extraordinary number. There's very few works that can beat that. One of them being Bhagavad Gita. Most works, and none of this size of 18,000 verses, can boast that many commentaries. And even though every commentary is wonderful, there's yet more to say. There's yet more to draw from that well. And this is what makes Bhagavatam a classic. So it's a really special book we have. And I'll just mention one last thing before we segue into the theme of this seminar, which is to say that the Bhagavata is a work of great philosophy and also of great literature at the same time. By philosophy, I mean it's very systematic and very dense in the intellectual attributes that it has. You can read Bhagavatam and get Sankhya and Vedanta and Nyaya, and all the philosophical systems are there. If any one of you have tried to read third canto Bhagavatam, Kapila Dev's instructions, you know just how technical and dense the Bhagavatam can become. But there's many sections like this. The prayers of the personified Vedas, or 10th canto, right, which is supposed to be all Leela, but it's right there. Very, very technical, intense, difficult philosophy with long, long commentaries of the acharyas, which are just as technical and philosophical. The Bhagavatam is a work of philosophy, but most works of philosophy are not very fun to read. They don't make good reading. This is just a reality. I did my undergraduate studies in the United States in philosophy and mathematics. And these philosophy books were fascinating. They were like, candy for the mind, bananas of the mind, just really for someone intellectually inclined. They're so interesting. It's like working out your intellectual muscles. But they're very difficult and very dry to read, extremely dry. You just have to you have to struggle through it, hold your breath and struggle through it till you get the ideas. It's just the nature of philosophy. At the same time, when you have works of beautiful poetry and literary quality and narratives and stories and artistic writings, they're usually not very philosophical. They don't convey ideas in a very systematic and technical way. The poet will suggest ideas in very oblique, indirect ways. But the Bhagavatam puts together both. It's clearly highly philosophical. It's known, our acharyas call it the commentary, the ideal commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And Jiva Goswami brings out in his writings the intensity of philosophical contribution of the Bhagavatam. But it's also a work of fine literature. Daniel Engels, one of the most famous Sanskritists, he's no more, of the previous generation, University of Chicago, said that the 10th canto of Bhagavatam was the finest piece of poetry he had ever read. And this is not someone who was studying Bhagavatam for spiritual upliftment. He was an academic. And yet in all his studies, right, he found this to be so wonderful, the language. The Bhagavatam uses dozens of Sanskrit meters, very beautiful vocabulary, wonderful metaphors and imagery, such a rich literary production, and the stories are wonderful. They make for great stories, great narratives, so much so that everyone from an old person to a young child can become absorbed in its pages. So that kind of combination, that kind of all-rounded excellence is something you find rarely. And we are very fortunate that we have Srimad Bhagavatam, we have the whole thing in the form of Srila Prabhupada's wonderful translation and purports, where he has taken a very difficult language. Sanskrit is, Bhagavatam has probably the most difficult Sanskrit of any Shastric literature. It's regarded as a test of your Sanskrit learning. He's taken this difficult literature, language, translated it into English that is easy for everyone to understand, although still quite erudite, and summarized the essence of the major commentaries from the Vaishnava acharyas that create such a rich heritage of literature, summarized those commentaries, added his own wonderful realizations, and presented it all in a beautiful form where we don't even have to pay an artist to create paintings for us with the manuscript or copy it by hand. It's all there, printed. So we're really spoiled, very, very spoiled. In prior ages, to get something of this quality, you would have had to be, by our standards, a millionaire, right? You would have had to be exceedingly rich just to pay someone enough to copy a book and do it accurately, but then to get, for that manuscript to have artistic quality to it, no, only kings and very rich merchants would have had the financial capacity to be able to get something of this quality and this clarity. So, anyway, that's a little bit about the Srimad Bhagavatam. But the one thing I want to emphasize here is that although the Srimad Bhagavatam is a great story, and these stories are wonderful, many of us may have grown up with those stories of Prahlada and Dhruva, or we've heard them for years, of child saints and of animals like Gajendra and his famous surrender to the Lord in times of distress, or Dhruva's determination to achieve the highest success even at such a young age, or Prahlad's tolerance, or so many Leelas are there, and of course Krishna's pastimes are there in 10th canto, his stealing of butter and his lifting of Govardhan Hill and his dancing with the gopis. So although there's so many Leelas here and pastimes here, these are not mere moral stories. They are much more complex and deep than that. Sometimes, with all good intention, when we present Srimad Bhagavatam to children, we simplify the stories, we decomplexify them, we sanitize them, and we present them as moral stories, as values education. What's the story of Dhruva about? Every parent from India will say, oh, it's about determination. If you are determined, you can achieve anything. Yes, that's there. The word Dhruva means determination. But the story as it's found in Srimad Bhagavatam is much more complex and much more interesting than a fairy tale, than a moral story. We all tell fairy tales and moral stories to children, but we stop telling them to ourselves or others when we grow up, right? Why? Because they're too simplistic. They're too boring, right? They don't match the reality of life as it's lived. Yes, if you're determined, you can achieve anything. Yes, but it also depends on a lot of socio-cultural factors, right? If you're born in a family with not very good resources, then it's unlikely that you're going to, statistics show, beyond a certain level, achieving success is much more difficult. Where if you're born with certain kinds of resources, it becomes much more easy. And there's geographic difference, and life becomes very complicated. So as we grow up, we stop telling fairy tales. We stop gaining things from them. The great sages of the past have not given us fairy tales. They've not given us moral stories, because such things don't have a long shelf life. They are not classics. They're basics. Right? They're just simple. What they have given us is something that not only matches the complexity of life, but exceeds it. Take a look at this example, the story of Dhruva, for example. Here's a young boy who is offended by his stepmother's mistreatment, Suruchi's mistreatment. and his father's complacency in the face of that mistreatment. Right? He goes up to sit on the lap of his father, and his father rejects him. He does not allow Dhruva to climb on the lap of his son. Why? Because his half-brother, Uttama, is already on his lap, and his stepmother refuses to let him get up to his father's lap. And what breaks Dhruva's heart is as much the words of his stepmother, which I'm sure by this age he's come to expect. Right? It's highly unlikely that this is the first time she's been mean to her stepson. People don't just all of a sudden blossom into terrible people. Right? This is a pattern of behavior. And so he's probably heard this before. She's probably handed out sweets to her stepson, to her own son, and not given them to Dhruva. She's probably left him out in times of play. She's probably left him out on Diwali day and not given him gifts. Right? He's probably used to some level of rejection from his stepmother. But you know what Bhagavatam specifies as the cause of his heartbreak? Is the fact that his father doesn't speak up. She says those harsh words to him in the presence of his father, right there. And he's standing down there, right, looking up at his father, and like any 5-year-old boy, hoping for some protection, not physical, but emotional protection. And he doesn't speak. He doesn't say anything. And that is the most humiliating, horrible experience that a child can go through. And that fills him with rage. He becomes so angry, as anyone would. It's a very, very normal reaction, especially for a spirited child like Dhruva. Right away, the Bhagavatam's account of Dhruva is set in what context? A troubled relationship between a father and a son. Have you ever heard of such things in this world? Of course. Of course. We all know of people with that kind of experience. And if you study the Bhagavatam just from that perspective, how many examples of troubled father-son relationships? Dhruva, Prahlada, King Vena and his father Nabhi. So many examples over and over. Kansa and Ugrasena. Over and over again, Bhagavatam gives examples of very good people in very tough family situations. Right away, Dhruva's story is more than just a moral story. Right? It's more than just honor your mother and father. It's more than just be determined. Right away. And this produces anger. And when he goes back to his mother Suniti, her situation is worse than Dhruva's. She's a much less favored wife, a rejected wife. She says, I'm not even good enough to be his maidservant, what to speak of his wife. She's been rejected by her husband, but that pain, again, she's probably grown used to. Today, the pain is much, much worse, because what makes things even more intolerable for a mother is to see that because of her lack of status and position, her son, her child has to suffer so much. That's the worst, right? That takes your pain and now inflicts it on someone you care for even more. And so she is in tears. And she has every reason to be angry and distressed, and she is. And yet, and this is where you see the Bhagavatam's message emerging, that through all those tears, those hot tears and that trembling from pain that his mother is going through, she does not lose her intelligence and her dedication to Krishna. And she is able to give her son instructions that will set him on the course of his life. Instructions that are very difficult to give. You know why? Because they're the same instructions that Suruchi, the stepmother, gave Dhruva. Suruchi said, you're never going to sit on the throne of your father because you are born from an unfortunate womb. The only way you're going to get this status is if you please the Supreme Lord Narayan. Only He can change your fate. And Suniti, imagine her strength, has the capacity, the strength to tell her son through all that pain that, you know, my boy, the one who gives you so much pain, she is right. I have no capacity to protect you in this situation. The only one who can protect you is the Supreme Lord Narayana. So, you go to the forest, right? Which mother has the courage to do that today? A 5-year-old boy. You have to go to the forest to seek him out. And he can fulfill all your desires. Right away, Dhruva's determination is not just innate, it's not just self-born. What's innate in him is his strong Kshatriya spirit. What's innate in him is his desire for revenge. That's normal. But the determination is something that comes from his mother, where she takes that anger and she channels it into determination. She says anger does good to no one. It doesn't help you, it doesn't help the person you're angry towards. But you can take that energy and you can channel it into something positive, determination. So she makes him Dhruva. Dhruva means determined. She makes him Dhruva by the power of her instructions, by her Krishna conscious intelligence. One more thing about the story. Dhruva goes off to the forest and he, first person who meets there is Narada Muni. Narada Muni has this knack for showing up at the right place at the right time. And sometimes to calm things down and sometimes to agitate things more, to stir the pot. And in this case, he's come to help this boy. And he stops Dhruva and he says, my dear boy, you know, he's the son of a king, of the king, Uttanapad. Everyone knows him. He says, you're just a child. You know, children get insulted all the time. When you play, your friends do something mean to you, you get over it. You go back to the playground, you start playing. He says, go back, go home, start playing again. Forget all this. Get over it. It's one way he tries to get him to go home. And then he says, and also, you know, insult and injury, the second thing he says is, what you're trying to achieve is very difficult. Yogis throughout the ages have spent birth after birth trying to achieve Lord Narayana in the core of their hearts, and they have failed to do so. This is really difficult. You might not achieve your goal. So go home. Second reason he gives him. The first one, Dhruva is like, He says, I'm a Kshatriya. By nature, I have a lot of spirit or energy and some desire to become great, to become even. I'm not going to be able to go home. The second reason is difficult. Dhruva is unfazed by that. That's just a test from Narada. But the third reason he gives, Narada Muni gives, is a very serious one. He says, insult and injury come in this world, whether we like it or not. It is our duty to tolerate, to let go of that, to be humble, and to go on with our life, to go on with our duty. And this Dhruva Maharaj acknowledges. He says, yes, I understand that you are giving me the highest instruction. I understand you're giving me the highest instruction, but I have to be honest with you. My dear Naraji, I cannot follow this instruction at this time. I'm too hurt. I'm too angry. I've got too much spirit in me. Please give me an instruction that I can follow. Now imagine here, he's met his spiritual master, and he's telling his spiritual master directly that I'm unable to follow your instructions. It's not a simplistic story. Honor your mother and father, honor your guru, do whatever the guru says. Yes, of course. He never rejects the instruction of the spiritual master. He says, your instruction is the best. But I'm being honest with you. I can't follow it, not at this time. So please give me an instruction that I can follow. And in that, there's no offense. Because there's never offense in honesty. Right? There is definitely offense in hypocrisy, but no offense in honesty. And he's being honest to his guru. And then at that point, Narada says, okay, now here's what you need to do. And within 6 months, Dhruva is at the very point that Narada wanted him to be at to begin with. Narada said, I want you to give up your anger and hatred and your feeling of revenge. And within 6 months, Dhruva is ready for that. So my point in telling this story is simply to say that the Bhagavatam is so much more than just moral stories, than just value education, than just fairy tales. It's got morals to it, yes. But the Bhagavatam provides us a guide for living in this world and ultimately transcending it. It's any psychological situation that we encounter in this world, we can find an example in Bhagavatam to guide us through that situation. Any situation. Family conflict, social issues, weakness, fall down, so many things. It's all there. And even as in this seminar, we're going to do a study of Bhagavatam from the lens of forgiveness. You could do this same sort of thing from dozens of other lenses. From familial relationships, husband and wife, father and child, mother and child. You can do this from the perspective of leadership and kings and subjects. One can do this from the perspective of relationships between different social classes. One can do it from a perspective of sannyasis and renunciates, from vanaprasthas. We can look at Bhagavatam from an ecological perspective. So many kathas are there in Bhagavatam. Look at the story of the Prachetas, for example. These 10 brothers emerge from years of meditation to see the world overrun by trees and use their yogic power to burn all the trees with the stated goal of making sure the earth has no trees left. And Lord Brahma himself comes in a panic to stop them. That Leela in itself has such a powerful ecological message for us. What it says and what it tells us about our relationship with the natural world. There's many kathas like this, half a dozen different kathas that speak specifically to our ecological condition. Any issue, any problem we have, it may be a new one that's only emerged in the last few decades. But it's not new to Srimad Bhagavatam. It's there. The message is there, the solution's there, our way, and none of them are simplistic. Every solution the Bhagavatam gives acknowledges the complexity of reality, the complexity of life in this world, and gives us a very practical pathway to navigate it. So we make Srimad Bhagavatam our friend, our daily companion. Then whatever we need, we can find. My own experience has been so many times in life, just when you need the most guidance or advice or friendship or support or just a caring hand, the Bhagavatam can provide it. You just pick up Srimad Bhagavatam, pick up any book, open up to any page, and the Bhagavatam will speak to you as a living work, because it's Krishna himself, right? Krishna svadhamo bhagate dharmajnana divisa kalo nashta drishamesha puranarko dhanodita. This is Krishna's form. After he left this world, he left himself behind in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's the segue to this theme of forgiveness, right? That this is just one lens among hundreds of lenses that you can put on Srimad Bhagavatam and study that work and find in it what you need to live life in this world and ultimately to go beyond it. So I'll pause here and see if anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts at this point, and then we'll say a few words about forgiveness. But I think it's good to take a little break here for a conversation. Yes, Vishaka Prabhu.
Thank you very much for a wonderful, eloquent, and very enlightening talk. My question is, what do we do when we come to parts in the Bhagavatam that seem like exaggerations, like Chitraketu Maharaj had 10 million wives? So how do we deal with that?
Wonderful question. You know, I was recently on a visit to Washington, D.C., and I went with my family. Gopal Krishna Maharaj was visiting there. And we took a few hours off to visit the Smithsonian Museum's Air and Space Museum. And my children, they're 10 and 12 years old, they have especially my older son has a real interest in things connected to flight and to space and so many things like that. So we did a visit. And my experience there was honestly like reading about Chitraketu's 10 million wives. It was breathtaking, jaw-dropping. It was like, wow, this is even possible? Not only is it possible, but this is reality? The number, recently what is it called? The James Webb telescope went deep into space and produced images of galaxies from 5 billion years ago. Not planets, not solar systems, not stars, galaxies that are larger than our own. And that is only a smattering of what's found in this universe, right? It's just like a little 1-second snapshot in the history of the universe. The point simply is that the more we learn, the more we recognize that there is far more just to this universe, just to this world, than our minds can wrap itself around. We develop our own areas of focus or specialization. So I know something about this subject. You may know, someone here might be a medical doctor. They know about the complexity of the human body and what it's capable of. And they become used to describing it and manipulating it. But for me, that's Chitraketu with 10 million wives, right? The human body is, wow, every cell can do what? Is how complex? And how many of these things do we have in our body? And at what rate are we producing them? But for someone who knows, right, this is daily fare, right? They use it, they manipulate it. The Sanskrit language is like that. For someone who doesn't know, it's, wow, this is mind-blowingly difficult and complex and beautiful. But for someone who understands, yes, you can work your way into it. So also it is with so many of the accounts of Srimad Bhagavatam. Yes, they're far out, and admittedly, for myself also, there are times where it's difficult to wrap my head around the extent of those descriptions. But I think it's also a fact that the more we learn, the more we recognize how little we know. And when the Bhagavatam provides its descriptions, there's always something significant that we can gain from it, even if we cannot wrap our heads around it entirely. And particularly with Chitraketu and his 10 million wives, right? I think the point that I gain from reading that particular description is to recognize that no matter how many times you try to achieve something in this world, and how many opportunities you have for it, things are just not in our control. Like, one wife might not give you a child. 2 wives might not give you a child. But 10 million tries? And sometimes we have that experience, right, in life. We try and we try and we try, and we are so determined. Somehow or the other, I'm going to achieve that. And yet, it's not what we're meant to have. It's not in our control. And Krishna is giving us a message that it's not in your control. And even when you finally have that son, it's not going to be who you thought he was going to be. And it's not going to work out the way you thought it was going to work out. Right? So, what I mean to say is that we may not be able to wrap our heads entirely around what the Bhagavatam says, and for that we need the humility of recognizing that there are many such things in this world that I cannot wrap my head around. And in fact, the more you study, the more you come to recognize how little you know. But alongside that humility, we don't have to give up. Humility doesn't mean we give up. We say, there's no hope. I'm never going to understand this, so forget it. No, it means I'm not going to wrap my head around it entirely, but there is some message here for me that I do need to gain. Bhagavatam is telling me this for a reason. And what is that reason? For me, it was that. Right? When I read the 10 million wives thing, that was the message I was getting. Krishna is making it very clear that when you're not meant to have something, you're not going to have it, no matter how much you try. But for someone else, maybe the message will be different, right, that they gain from that story. So that's what I would say, kind of on a 2-part level. So, thank you. Yes, Sundarananda Prabhu.
Prabhu, thank you for such a brilliant start to the sessions. I just wanted to add a point on that you just said. But what does happen is that if you have an area of specialization that only very few of us have, and there's something in Srimad Bhagavatam which is so authentic, you become completely bowled out and straight away follower. And I'll just share with you that experience. So 25 years ago, I used to do fetal surgery. And we were only 2 people in the world who were doing what I was doing. One was in CHOP in Philadelphia and myself. And we talk about fetal surgery, fetal development, and I used to advise on that. And when I did the 3rd canto, when Lord Kapildev describes the fetal development from his mother's womb, That was just astounding. It is so accurate. Obviously, the words are different, liver is different, and then the kidneys are different. But when you read that, and you see that, okay, this we only know fetal science about 50 years ago from ultrasound, but this is millions and millions of years ago when it was written, and so accurately stands the truth of time. So on just the flip side of that, I felt that if this is so true, everything else has to be true. So that's just increased my faith. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, bro. A wonderful example about the development of the embryo within the womb. Really wonderful reading for any parents or parents-to-be, actually. It's really inspiring to hear how the child develops. Very personal description. Thank you.
Prabhu, thank you for your class so far. I was just curious, when you were talking about Arjuna reading the instructions of the Gita. So before on the battlefield, the instructions were very clear: get up and fight. I was just wondering, how did the Gita speak to him to tell him to go to the forest afterwards?
So I don't know, as in the Bhagavatam doesn't give us the specifics of it. One can speculate that, the practice of dharma is something that must be done in every stage of life. And dharma is something that is continuously in flux. It always changes. Not our supreme dharma, not paro dharma towards the Lord. That stays the same. But our duties in this world change based on our age and what stage of life we're in, our capacities, our relationships, and all of that. And so when Krishna is asking Arjuna to perform his dharma, but do it as an offering to him, his dharma at that point in his life has changed, right? And Krishna gives so many wonderful instructions in connection to renunciation, especially the final instruction of the Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. That instruction at that point said, give up all your dharmas and just surrender to me. It meant stand up and fight. But you can easily see how at the end of someone's life, at the core, after they've performed their duties in this world, that same instruction can mean give up everything and surrender to Krishna, walk to the Himalayas, right? So that application requires the guidance, the instruction of the Vaishnavas around us, the spiritual master, the communities of sadhus, right, to help us reorient those instructions in a way that's applicable for our own times in our own life. But also certain verses will jump out and speak to us at different points in our lives, right? Because I'm in this profession of being a scholar or academic, it seems like every other verse of Bhagavatam, every other purport, Prabhupada is criticizing PhDs. Right? He says, every third verse I read, Prabhupada is saying, you cannot understand this by mundane education. Such fools think that just because they have a PhD, they can understand Krishna. But they do not know. And again, Prabhupada will say this, and it's like, oh gosh, so. It's like, why can't you, So it's really, the verses speak to us at different times. When I first became a grihastha, all of a sudden all these verses speaking about how to approach family life and how to navigate what it means, the strengths and weaknesses of the grihastha ashram, they were speaking very loudly, right? So also different verses speak loudly to us at different times. Krishna adjusts the volume of certain verses to help us hear more clearly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the wonderful class, Radhika Raman Prabhu. So earlier on you mentioned there's about 90 different commentaries in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I assume probably thousands for Bhagavad Gita. But some of those commentaries may be a variation, even the Sanskrit. But how do we know which one is the original, which one is like authentic? Because although we've been introduced to Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, but what is to say that somebody may say, well, this isn't right, but a different sampradaya may be correct?
Yes. Every sampradaya has its own commentaries on Bhagavatam. You have Mayavadi commentaries on Bhagavatam itself also. I mean, believe it or not, somehow it's very difficult, but they do it. They do it. and pretty impressive how you can take a work, focus so much on bhakti. And, but in any case, there's commentaries of all different stripes and varieties. And these commentaries have a very practical purpose to them as well. You see, the Bhagavatam's vocabulary and language is so difficult that there are words that are used in the Bhagavatam that are not used anywhere else in Sanskrit. And there are words that are used in the Bhagavatam in a specific sense that they are not used in that sense in other places. You encounter this many times. So how do you know what the word means? And the answer is only through the commentaries of previous acharyas. That meaning has been passed down over centuries, over millennia. This is what the word means. This is how to understand this phrase. Because if you look it up in a dictionary, you find the general definition, and then you find this secondary definition. And the secondary definition is the one from the Bhagavatam, refers you to that verse in Bhagavatam which you are translating. The dictionary will say, look at this verse. So it's a circular thing. And there's no way to understand the meaning of certain texts except through drawing from commentaries. So, therefore, taking in parampara is so crucial because otherwise we cannot understand. And it's really a choice, right? It's really a choice that if we select a parampara to follow, a sampradaya to follow, then it is in our best interest to stick with that parampara, to stick with that sampradaya. Otherwise, what happens is you can confuse yourself quite thoroughly with different sorts of interpretations and meanings of the same passage that come from very different perspectives, often saying very different things about the work. And so it's like visiting two doctors who give us two different prescriptions and then mixing the two and saying, one I'll take this medicine, the other this way, I cover all my bases. You don't cover your bases, you just get yourself sick by taking medicines that may not go very well together. In fact, both of those medicines may actually cure you, but together they can be poisonous, right? Often there's different possible treatments for the same problem, but you don't want to mix them. At the least, you'll take an overdose, and at worst, you may actually cause a very negative conflict between those medicines. So the same is true about commentaries on works as complex as Srimad Bhagavatam. We want to choose a sampradaya and stick with it. And in that way we can deepen our understanding, and then we can appreciate the commentaries of other sampradayas from a distance. We can say, wow, Bhagavatam is so wonderful that it's guided people in so many different ways, in so many different moods and approaches to serving Krishna. Many of these other commentaries are written by great Vaishnavas who are really advanced in their realization. But they're taking it from a different perspective, a different approach, right? And so it's very important that we matriculate in a school and get our degree there, right? Just like when you go to study at the university, you can take a course here, take a course there, dabble here and there, but eventually you want to matriculate in one university and stick with it until you get your degree. Otherwise, if you keep transferring from one to another, you'll never get your degree, right? So it's a very practical purpose. And one thing, just to give us a little bit of confidence, I once listened to a Bhagavata Katha. It was a couple of days by one very, very famous Bhagavat Kathakar in India. And it was, and one of the things I remember him saying, he was not a Gaudiya Vaishnava, and one of the things I remember him saying is that the best commentaries on the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, he says, are written by the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. He was from a different sampradaya. He said, but I still refer to Sanatana Goswami's Vaishnava Toshani because there's no commentaries that go in as deep as the Gaudiya commentaries. Right? So this is something that's been appreciated by a lot of different devotees. The Gaudiya commentaries are really the standard, the premier.
Thank you so much. Just one quick question. From your own personal investigation or research, have you come across the difference between Narayan as a Supreme Personality of Godhead or Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because many people follow Narayan as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and see Krishna as an incarnation of Narayan.
Yes.
And that's just slightly.
Yes. Yeah, it's there's one of the distinctive features of Srimad Bhagavatam is that it really emphasizes Krishna's supremacy. There's even one scholar, Frida Matchett, who's written this book called Krishna, Lord or Avatar, where she looks at the stance of different Puranas on the question of Krishna versus Vishnu that you raised, and highlights the Bhagavata's emphasis and its uniqueness on this point, that Krishna is really, right from the beginning, not just in the 10th canto, Krishna is very, very much the Supreme Lord. Having said that, I think it's very important that we recognize when this question becomes important. The first thing we need to do is to recognize that God is a person. Then we need to recognize that as a person, he is someone with energies and relationships. And when we recognize he's got relationships, then we recognize that he is Vishnu, Narayana, Krishna, Ramachandra. And then when we worship Lord Vishnu and we become Vaishnavas, we can start to distinguish between the different forms of the Lord, as Rama, as Nrsimha, as Vishnu, as Narayan, and as Krishna. And we can come to recognize that Krishna is the original personality of Godhead. But that battle should not be fought prematurely. It's something that matters very little up to a certain point. And we see this in Jiva Goswami's Sandarbhas. Jiva Goswami, for the first 3 Sandarbhas, pays no attention to the question of whether Krishna is supreme or Narayan is supreme. He just describes generally Vishnu, Narayan, he just, the general idea of why? Because his focus is on the point that God is a person. He's trying to get his reader. The Shat Sandarbhas are written not for just a devotee audience. They're written for a broad audience of intellectuals and scholars of that time. And he's not keen on that point. It's only in the Krishna Sandarbha, in the 4th Sandarbha, that he comes to this specific question of the Lord's different manifestations and which one of these is supreme. It's very, very late in this discussion. By that time, his readers have accepted that God is a person. They have rejected Mayavad philosophy. They have accepted the idea that the Lord has Shakti and energies. They've accepted the idea of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. They've understood the idea that the Lord has 3 different energies. They've understood the importance of the Lord's abode, his dhamma, his paraphernalia, his transcendental body, that he has a body that is not material. They have understood pretty much everything of the philosophical foundations of our philosophy before he starts to debate this question of Krishna versus Vishnu. So,
thank you so much.
Every battle has its time, and we don't want to make it premature. So, okay, maybe one last question, and then we proceed.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. The demons representing certain anathas in the 10th canto. How does that relate to the main story? Or
how does that relate to?
How does this relate to the main narrative? How does this story work?
So as we were saying, the Bhagavatam has multiple layers of meaning. There's the narrative itself. There is the philosophical import of that narrative. There is the poetic taste that emerges, the relish that comes from that narrative. There are the various layers of metaphorical meaning that are present in that narrative. And each one of those is very, very valuable, and none of them cancel out the others. Sometimes the danger with metaphor is that people think that metaphorical meanings therefore reject literal meanings. Now that I have the metaphorical meaning, the literal meaning is worthless. No. None of those layers cancel each other out. Because we understood the philosophical import of the story doesn't mean we can't relish it for its poetic quality or vice versa. So this is actually going to be the topic of tomorrow morning's Chaitanya Charitamrita class, is on the role of metaphor in Krishna consciousness. Because the section that we're currently reading in Chaitanya Charitamrita is a very elaborate and very advanced metaphor on the quality of Srimati Radharani's love for Krishna, and mapping that love onto the various qualities of her physical form, of her body. Very beautiful and very advanced and very metaphorical. And so we'll discuss your question at length tomorrow morning.
Jai, thank you.
Okay, so at this point, let's move on. How are we doing this? Do people need to take a break or stand up? I've got about 14 minutes more of content, and then I think we can conclude. Is okay? Is okay? Okay, if anyone needs to take a break and get up and use the restroom or whatever, please don't hesitate. Okay, so forgiveness. The one thing I want to talk about today, the rest is for tomorrow and Sunday, the one thing is Krishna's quality of forgiveness, in order to provide us inspiration to embody that quality in whatever capacity we can ourselves. So there's this famous verse in Bhagavad Gita, perhaps some of you may know it from memory. Krishna says in 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, verse 30, he says, Apichet suduracharo bhajate mam ananya bhak sadhureva samantavya samyagvya vasito hitsa. Where he tells Arjun, he says, Apichet suduracharo, even if someone is does something terrible, even if someone acts in a terrible way, so durachara. Durachara means very bad, and su means very, very bad. He says, even if someone acts in a terrible way, bhajate mam ananya bhak, if they are trying to worship me with full focus, sadhur eva samantavya, one must consider that person to be a sadhu, a saintly person. Why? Samyagvya vasito hisa, because their intelligence is properly situated. And in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada says something very, very interesting, very profound, where he says that in a devotee's life there are two tracks. There is the conditioned life, and there is the transcendental life. And we live on these two tracks for someone practicing to be a devotee. He says that sorry, I shouldn't have messed with it. Thank you. Oh, I see. I pulled it back. Okay. So he says there's two tracks, the condition and the devotional, or the transcendental. And he said that most of the time, hopefully, these two run in parallel with each other. As in, Prabhupada uses the word wholesome. A devotee lives in a wholesome condition. That is, our material goals and our material attempts, maybe job or family or whatever, they are not conflicting with our transcendental life, our devotional service. They're supportive of it, right? So our career is something that helps us earn money that we can use in Krishna's service, and we can support a family, and we can raise that family to be Krishna conscious. So things kind of work out. But he says occasionally in a devotee's life there may be some conflict. And what happens is we end up doing something that we regret. We end up doing something that is a mistake. We misbehave. We become durachara. We do something abominable, he says. And in such a situation, Krishna promises that a devotee is not lost. He says in the next verse, Kshipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat chantim nigacchati kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. He says the reason this person should be considered a sadhu is because their intelligence is properly situated. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. They will become a dharmatma very soon. They will become good and wholesome again very quickly. Arjun, you tell the world that my devotee never perishes. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary on this verse, he says the way that this happens in a devotee's life, he says, is that the fire of remorse in a devotee is so strong, so powerful, that that fire burns up both the reaction of that misbehavior and the tendency to do it. And we see this most clearly in the example of Maharaj Parikshit in Bhagavatam. When Maharaj Parikshit, Prabhupada says the same thing in that episode. When Maharaj Parikshit, you may know, he's out hunting in the forest, and he's very hungry and very thirsty, and he comes to the ashram of a sage, and the sage is in deep meditation and doesn't greet him properly, and so he becomes angry because he's in a famished and thirsty condition, and so he finds a dead snake outside the ashram and puts it around the neck of the sage, just in anger, and leaves. And so Prabhupada says that for any good person, remorse, he says, remorse emerges in the heart very quickly after a mistake is made. He says this is very natural, and especially in the heart of a devotee. And so that fire of remorse is so powerful that it purifies the heart of a devotee. And therefore Krishna says that one should still think of this devotee as a sadhu, even if something wrong has been done. He uses the word mantavya, which in Sanskrit is I forget the technical grammatical term, but it's a word that signifies a requirement. It's just like kirtaniya, right? Kirtaniya sadahari. You must chant Krishna's holy names always, right? So this word mantavya is the same sort of word. You must think of him as a sadhu. Right? So he's not giving an option, he's giving an instruction on the basis of the devotee's intention. So this is one of Krishna's very special qualities, that when Krishna sees that the devotee's intention is good, is wholesome, but the action is not quite matching the intention, Krishna forgives the action and pays more attention to the intention of the devotee. Can you think of any story in Bhagavatam, any lila in Bhagavatam, where Krishna demonstrates the ignoring of the action of the devotee in favor of his intention? The devotee pointed out. That's probably the most important classic example, right, of this is the example of Putana, where Krishna, Putana is the reverse example. We'll get to that in just a moment. Putana is Krishna ignoring the intention and taking the action. Try the other direction, when Krishna ignores the action and takes the intention. Yes? Yes, exactly. Jai and Vijay is a perfect example of this. When the four Kumaras come to Vaikunta to see Lord Vishnu, and Jai and Vijay stop the four Kumaras at the gate. Why? Their intention is good, right? What is their duty? What is their role? What's their seva? To protect Vaikunta from intruders, from people who are not qualified to go in. And they see the 4 Kumaras, and they think, 4 kids, unclothed, unkempt, have wandered into Vaikunta. What are you doing here? And they stop them. And any good visa or immigration service is supposed to do this, right? Show me your credentials. And so they do their duty. Their intention is good, but the action is incorrect. The application was wrong. They failed to recognize that these four Kumaras were pure in heart. They wanted to see the Lord. They deserved to see the Lord. And as a result of that, they got cursed. But Lord Vishnu's concern was not with the mistake they had made, but what would be the fate of the 4 Kumaras, of the Jain Vijay. As soon as they were cursed, Jain Vijay cursed them. You're going to fall to the material world. Why? Because your mentality of discrimination, to discriminate between higher and lower, qualified and unqualified, that is the attitude of the material world. There's no room for discrimination in the spiritual world. Where are there any enemies in the spiritual world? That mentality is not fit for here. Therefore, go down to that place where discrimination rules. And so when they make that curse, Krishna, Lord Vishnu, is in such a panic, he comes out of Vaikunta. And the acharyas say that he comes running. It says his hand is on the shoulder of Garuda. And the acharyas in their commentaries, they say the reason he's not flying on Garuda is because he didn't wait for Garuda. He came running, and Garuda came running behind him. And so Lord Vishnu, to acknowledge Garuda's service, because the Lord cares about everyone. He never wants to hurt anyone. And so he ran out, and Garuda came running behind him. And so just to acknowledge his service, the Lord puts his hand on Garuda's shoulder and says, it's okay, thank you for coming. Right? But the Lord is in so much anxiety. Why? Because he knows Jain Vijay have good intentions. They're not to be blamed. They were trying their best to protect the Lord, to do their seva nicely. And in fact, the acharyas say that even Jain Vijay were not entirely without blame in this situation. What was their main fault? They acknowledge this later. Is their anger. You've come to Vaikunta to see the Lord. Someone's asking to see your visa, and so angry that you're going to curse the immigration agents? You're going to curse these wonderful devotees of the Lord? In fact, Vallabhacharya, he goes farther, and he says, there are 7 gates to Vaikunta, and each one of those gates has guards in front. The only reason for 6 of those gates, the Kumaras did not see the guards, is because they were qualified to enter those 6 gates. But the 7th gate is the gate of Bhakti. Each one of the 6 is a gate that you pass through with different kinds of qualifications of austerity and cleanliness and humility and so on. But the 7th gate, you have to have Bhakti to get in. And they had all good qualities, but they were not yet Bhaktas. It's only after they see the Lord. Not see, it's only after they smell the Lord that they become devotees. You remember that beautiful verse? Tasya ravinda nayanasya padaravinda kinjal kamishya tulasi makaranda vayo antargata swavivirena chakara tesham sankshobhamaksharajusham apichitta tanvo. Tasyaravinda nayanasya, when they saw that the lotus feet, padaravinda, the lotus feet of the lotus-eyed Lord. Tasyaravinda nayanasya padaravinda kinjalka mishra tulasi makaranda vayu. And they smelled the fragrance of the air that was mixed. They smelled the fragrance of Krishna's lotus feet as it was mixed with the fragrance of tulsi. And again, in their commentaries, the acharyas are very particular about what the Bhagavatam is saying. It is not saying that they smelt the fragrance of tulsi. They're saying they smelt the fragrance of Krishna's lotus feet mixed with tulsi, which indicates what? That Krishna's lotus feet have their own fragrance, and tulsi merely enhances that fragrance. Right? So it's not that Krishna needs tulsi and a bunch of flowers to make his feet smell good. His feet are not like ours. They have a fragrance, all of their own. And that fragrance, when it's mixed with the fragrance of tulsi makaranda vayu, the tulsi manjaris and their pollen, it enhances that fragrance. Antargata, and when it goes into their nostrils, sankshobham, they become agitated. These are sages who have never experienced agitation in their entire lives. That's precisely why they chose to stay as Kumaras, as boys, at the age of 5 or 6 or 7. Because why? At that age, you don't experience agitation. You don't know what is lust. Your body has not developed. You don't know what all the emotional agitations are like. They stayed little boys, so they never have to experience agitation in their lives. They stay in a steady state their entire lives. And they're the oldest sages in creation, the first sons of Brahma. And yet today, their steady state has been shattered. Just not even by touching Krishna, or seeing him yet, or talking to him, or seeing his beautiful pastimes, just by his smell, they've lost whatever yogic stability they had. And they become bhaktas, they become devotees. Anyway, the point was, it's a long digression, but the point was, the Kumaras were not without fault also in the situation. Vallabhacharya says they did not have bhakti and they succumbed to anger. And the Kumaras recognized this later on in the story, towards the end, when they see the Lord and finally they offer prayers to Krishna. They say, "My dear Lord, if you want to punish us for the wrongdoing we have committed, you are welcome to do so. Because we know that we have cursed 2 faultless persons." This story is very interesting from the perspective of forgiveness. The fundamental question that all the acharyas are looking for, not looking for, but raising in their commentaries, is who is to blame in this episode? Who is to blame? On one level, it's Jai and Vijay. And Prabhupada makes this clear in the purport, as do other acharyas. When the 4 Kumaras are there, Prabhupada says 2 reasons. One is they are great qualified sages, and therefore they should not be stopped. The other reason, very nice reason, they're children. He says children can go anywhere. And it's very natural for children to become upset when they're stopped from going somewhere. So he says on both levels, they're children, they're innocent, and on the level that they are sages, they should have allowed them to go through. So they should not have stopped him, and it was the Jai and Vijay's fault. And the Bhagavatam says so as well. But as soon as they recognize that fault, as soon as they stopped Jai and Vijay cursed them, right away, the 4 Kumaras cursed Jai and Vijay, right away, Jai and Vijay, they recognize that we made a mistake. They go, "Oh no, this is terrible. These are sages." As soon as they open their mouth, they recognize we've made a big mistake, and they fall at Jai and Vijay's feet. And they tell them, whatever punishment you want to give us, it's okay. Just please don't put us in a place where we will forget the Lord. That's all. We can go become demons. We can go to this material world. Just let us remember. Never let us forget Krishna. So Jai and Vijay are at fault. But the 4 Kumaras are also at fault because they succumb to anger when they're supposed to be sages. They're supposed to have their anger under control. And yet they become angry. And so they apologize afterwards. They say to Krishna, please, whatever punishment you want to give us, it's perfectly okay. But then there's one other person to blame. And that's Krishna himself. He then comes on the scene and he says, actually, both of you are not at fault. This was all my plan. Because the Lord wants to appear and do these wonderful leelas as Lord Ramachandra and Lord Nrsimha and as Krishna, and he needs good antagonists. He needs worthy people to fight with. And no one's better at pleasing the Lord than his devotee. So even to fight with the Lord, his devotee is better. So Krishna's to blame. And at the end of the story, at the end of the conversation, the very last thing, there's blame placed on one more person. Anyone remember? Lakshmi Devi. One time, a long time ago, Jai and Vijay interrupted and entered Vaikunta, I think. I'm forgetting now exactly. I think they entered the Lord's quarters when Lakshmi Devi and Lord Narayan were resting. Yes, yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that correction. So you're right. Lakshmi Devi wanted to enter the quarters of Lord Narayan while he was resting. And Jai and Vijay stopped her from entering because the Lord was not to be disturbed. And so she cursed Jai and Vijay that one day you're going to lose your position. So anyway, the acharyas are all concerned with this question, who is to blame? But the reason this story is so wonderful for our purposes is because it shows that when it comes to matters of forgiveness, forgiving or being forgiven, almost always fault is on multiple sides, right? It's very rare that we find ourselves in a situation where we are 100% right and someone is 100% wrong. Or that person is 100% right and we are 100% wrong. It's always a mixed bag. And what's so beautiful about the Jai and Vijay story is that by the end of it, everyone is willing to take blame in the situation. Jai and Vijay, the 4 Kumaras, and the Lord himself. Everyone is willing to say, yes, it's my fault. But anyway, back to the original point. Jai and Vijay was an example of Krishna taking the intention and ignoring the action. And there's a famous verse in this regard. Bhava grahi janardana is the last line of the verse. Whatever we do in our practice of bhakti, Krishna accepts the bhava. He accepts the intention. And so lucky we are for this fact, because so much of what we do in the path of bhakti is all full of fault, right? There's so many mistakes and so many issues with what we do. And yet, Krishna appreciates the intention and never lets his devotee perish. Another good example of this is Maharaj Bharat. Bharat Maharaj went to the forest with the intention of achieving Krishna. Did his very, very best. Ended up getting distracted and becoming a deer in his next life. But Krishna did not let him perish. Name bhakta pranashyati. He gave him a path through multiple lives to achieve the goal that he started out with, right? So when the intention is good, but the action is wrong, Krishna accepts the intention and ignores the action. Conversely, if the action is good, but the intention is wrong, guess what Krishna does? He accepts the action and ignores the intention. And the best example of this is Putana. Right? That beautiful verse, 3rd canto of Bhagavatam, spoken by Uddhava. As he's remembering Krishna's mercy, he gives this as the exemplar of Krishna's mercy. Aho bakiyam stanaka lakutam. Here's a witch, Baki, who came to you with stanaka lakutam, a breast covered with poison. And yet, you gave this woman, this witch, the position of your own mother. Why? Because the action was favorable. She was acting as his nurse. And you ignored the intention behind it. Where, he says, will you find a personality more merciful than this? What are other examples of Krishna accepting intention and accepting the action and ignoring the devotee's intention? Any other examples? Yes. Yeah, Indra's example was even worse. It was both bad intention and bad action. Both. We'll get to that in just a moment. He intended to harm the Vrajavasis, and he actually tried to do it. So we'll get there in one moment. Yes. Yes. There's the Bhrigu story when he comes and he tests who is the Supreme Lord. He comes up to Lord Vishnu and he kicks him in the chest. And the Lord says, I hope your foot wasn't hurt by my hard chest. I hope you're okay. Right? He understands his intention and ignores the action. Particularly, maybe that's a reverse example. But anyway, other examples of, I think I've got another famous example is, yes, in the back. Yes, very nice. Yes, Vidura offering the banana skin to the Lord, right? Where Krishna is taking the intention, ignoring the action that's being done. This is still the other example. Another example is Ajamil, where Krishna took the action and ignored the intention behind it. The intention initially was to call for his son, Narayan, at the time of his death. He was calling for his child. That's why he remembered the word Narayan. But Krishna is so merciful, he said, "Oh, you called me? No, that's not who he was calling. But no, you were calling me. Your action was good. You were calling Krishna's holy names." Yeah. So the point is, Krishna is so kind that when the intention is good, he takes the intention and ignores the action. When the action is good, he takes the action and he ignores the intention. And when both are terrible, like in the case of King Indra, or in the case of Lord Brahma, where the intention and the action are improper, right? Indra wanted to exert his supremacy out of anger and pride and kill the Vrajavasis, and his action was just as terrible. Krishna still forgives when the devotee asks for forgiveness. In each of the earlier cases, Krishna practically forgives just like that. He takes what's good and ignores the rest. When at least one thing is good, it gives him something to focus on. The intention is good, Krishna says, okay, let's take this. Ignore the action. Action is good, Krishna says, sure, let's take this. And sometimes we end up doing some service in our practice of bhakti. We do our devotional service, our seva, whatever, and our intention may not be clean. We may be doing it for power or pride or prestige or to show someone. Lucky for us, Krishna takes the action and he says, it's okay, intention will be purified in course of time. And Dhruva is another great example of this. His action was perfect in his service to the Lord. His intention was less than pure. He wanted great power. But Krishna took the action, purified the intention. So in every circumstance, Krishna is very, very kind, very, very merciful, and very, very forgiving. I mean, just think of this, and I'll end with this thought. How many lifetimes have we spent ignoring Krishna? How many lifetimes have we spent actively rejecting him? Every time Krishna calls or he looks forward for us in some way, through his devotees, through his books, we turn down his invitation. We say, I'm not interested, I don't have time. And we do terrible things, and we end up in different species, from human beings down to cockroaches. And Krishna repeatedly insists on accompanying us all through those lifetimes, forgiving us over and over and over again. I remember years ago, when I was, 10 or 11 years old, we received a phone call from at home. And, just a random call. I thought it was a spam call, someone calling randomly. I picked up the phone, said hello, and they said, yes, hello, I'm looking for Arun, which is my father's legal name. And I said, okay. He said, is he there? I said, who wants to talk to him? He wasn't there at home at the time. And he said, well, it's a brother of his who wants to talk. And I thought, a brother? He has one brother, he's in India, and he doesn't talk like this. This is a spam call. And so I hung up the phone. He called back, and he said, hello, I want to speak to Arun. And I recognized the voice again, same guy. I hung up the phone. The next day, he called back again. And he said, before you hang up the phone, let me tell you, I am his fraternity brother from his college days in the late 60s in the United States. And I have been looking for him for years now. This was before the days of Facebook and all of that. He said, it's been decades I've been looking for him. Have I found him? And I said, where did he study? And he said, Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. And I said, yes, that's him. He said, can you please give him this message that I've been looking for him? Here's my phone number. Can he call me back? 3 times, after looking for my father for decades, 3 times he called and 3 times I hung up the phone on him. Imagine if I had kept hanging up the phone on him. Would he have called back again? No. Give up. This person doesn't want to hear me, or his son, at least, doesn't want to. This is Krishna. Krishna has been calling us every lifetime, every month, every day. He calls us. How does he call us? He'll send one of his books to us and say, here, read this. And we say, I don't have time. I'm not interested. I read this already when I was a kid. I heard all these stories before. And we hang up the phone. And those Bhagavatams in our house still stay nicely wrapped in plastic. Or he sends his devotees on Sankirtan, on Harinam, and they ask us to do japa. And we say, no, I don't have the time. Or I don't see the point. And we hang up. And he sends us prasad. And we enjoy the prasad, and then we ignore him again. And we hang up the phone. Again and again and again, Krishna calls, and we hang up, and we hang up. But he never stops calling. He's always calling over and over and over again. And when we're ready to turn towards him, he forgives. 11th canto of Bhagavatam, beautiful verse. It says, Krishna is just like a mother who forgives so many transgressions of her child. Over and over again. The minute we want to turn towards Krishna, Krishna says, okay, forget it all. Let the past be the past. Now you're mine, and I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to guide you back to me. Imagine if Krishna held grudges. Imagine if he was someone who held a grudge, how much harder we would have to work on the path of bhakti. We would be at this for lifetimes, trying to explain every behavior and apologize for it. I'm sorry that one time I did that horrible thing and became a cockroach. I'm so sorry. And then after that, I became a dog, and it was terrible. And that time when I ignored you then, and this time when I mistreated one of, it'll be, but Krishna's, no. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat chantim nikachati kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. He says, no, my devotee never perishes. And so Krishna forgives, right? And because he forgives, and because we expect that forgiveness from him, therefore, it behooves us to give that forgiveness to others. It behooves us to forgive and to seek forgiveness for others, because that is what we expect from the Lord. Prabhupada ends that purport on that verse about Putana. He says, this is the standard of character of the Lord. He says, this is the Lord's standard of character. That woman who came to him as a witch, her breast covered with poison, when he was but a baby, to kill a baby. There are few crimes that are considered worse than to kill an innocent child. That woman who comes in that way, just because she gave you her breast as a mother, you consider her your mother. How could there be one more merciful than him? And Prabhupada says, this is the standard of character for the Lord. So we stop here, and tomorrow we will discuss about seeking forgiveness, and hopefully today was more theoretical and looking at Leelas and explaining about Bhagavatam. Tomorrow I hope for it to be very systematic. Bhagavatam gives a very nice formula for how we can seek forgiveness from others when we have done something wrong. What steps we should take. We see this exemplified in the lives of many devotees, and we'll give examples from their stories, and hopefully provide a method that we can apply in our own lives. And then on Sunday we will reverse it and talk about the importance of forgiving and how we can bring ourselves to forgive and what those methods are, all drawing from the examples of Srimad Bhagavatam. So thank you all so much for your attention. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu ki. A wonderful, wonderful discourse. Thank you so much, Prabhu. So we've still got 2 more sessions to look forward to. And of course, tomorrow morning and on Sunday morning, Radhika Raman Prabhu is going to be giving us Chaitanya Charitamrita class. Okay, so just before we wrap up for today, we're not finished yet. So I'm going to ask His Grace Vrindavan Chanda Prabhu to come on. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are doing this event in collaboration with Go Matsya, and obviously Radhika Raman Prabhu has been speaking about the Bhagavatam. So let us go deeper in imbibing ourselves in the Bhagavatam's potency and sharing with others. So Vrindavan Chanda Prabhu, please come up and share some words on the Bhagavatam and what we can do to propagate this spiritual nectar for everyone. And then after Vrindavan Chanda Prabhu speaks, then we can all make our way to the Sewa hall where there'll be prasadam for us as well. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this Bhagavatam session. We've been arranging this Bhagavatam sessions now for a few years, I think about 5 years, and always we try to get the best speakers. And as you have heard this today, we are getting the best of the best. When we organize these kathas, there's 2 objectives we have. And those objectives are following the instructions of Srila Vyasadeva himself and Srila Prabhupada. The first instruction Srila Vyasadeva gives in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, the 3rd verse, Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamayanam. Pibata, he says relish. Relish this Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam Rasamayanam. So that's what we do for the first part. We relish through our years the messages of Bhagavatam from these great speakers. Then right at the very end of the Bhagavatam, the 12th canto, 13th chapter, 13th verse, he gives the other instruction, which is part of our katha. What does he say? Dadati yo Bhagavatam. Give the Bhagavatam as a gift. Give the Bhagavatam as a gift. So we try to follow these 2 principles in our katha. So our first call to action was to relish. We've done that. I'll spend much less time on the second call to action, which is to distribute. So we have, I hope the slide works. So what is that call to action? The call to action is to give Bhagavatam. And that was a very core message of Srila Prabhupada. For many years we have sort of neglected that instruction, and Srimad Bhagavatam has never been on the top of the bestsellers list, although it is the greatest of the literatures. But a few years ago, by the efforts of the great generals of our movement, His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu, we started a campaign, a worldwide campaign called the Badra Campaign. And that Badra Campaign is built on this very verse from the 12th canto, 13th chapter, 13th verse, where it says, if on the full moon night, during the month of Badra, one places on the golden throne the Srimad Bhagavatam and gifts it, one will attain the transcendental destination in one's next life. So taking that call to action by Srila Vyasadeva throughout the world, we started off a few years ago. We achieved almost the impossible, 10,000 sets of Bhagavatam in 1 year. Then the following year, we got to beat it. Is it possible? We did 25,000. And then last year we said, can we do better? Do you think we can do 30,000? And we did 38,000. And this year we're saying, you know, the theme of one of the themes of our campaign this year is assume it can be done. That is our starting point, assuming it can be done. So our starting point is we're going to assume we can achieve 43,000 sets of Bhagavatam distributed. And like little squirrels, we at Bhaktivedanta Manor, we make our little contribution too. And that contribution is 600 sets. But we put on the back foot this year. Last year we were already, at this point in time, we were like 250, 300 sets. This year, we've only done 75. And Badra Purnima is on the 10th of September. So we got our work cut out for us. And we can only do it if every one of us pulls our weight. Every one of us says, we are not following only the first instruction of Vyasadeva, Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamayalam, but we're going to follow the second 2, Dadati Yo Bhagavatam. I'm also going to gift Bhagavatam. And this is the call to action, dear devotees. Srila Prabhupada said, I want that every respectable person has a full set of Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita in his home. When the Acharya speaks, what do the disciples do? They follow. They meditate. They rack their brains, how to do. And that's what our seva is. This year's campaign, for the Badra, every year we have a theme. This year's theme is Save Earth Now. This very theme was an article, I can't remember the newspaper, the East Lower Side or something. When Prabhupada first went to America, that was the headline. Save Earth Now is the Swami's message. So that message remains the same. The world is in a very precarious condition. The war in Ukraine, inflation, going into recession, climate change, economic problems, and the leaders don't have a clue what the solution is. But Bhagavatam gives that solution. And Bhagavatam says the root cause of all problems, if you want to find the root cause of all problems, what is the root cause? No, that's the solution. The root cause is the condition of people's hearts. Nobody knows but the Bhagavatam how to address the conditions of people's hearts. And the Bhagavatam says, Shrinvata swakatam Krishna, punya shravana kirtanam, hridayantastoh bhadrani, vidunoti suritsatam. By putting the messages of Bhagavatam in the heart, when Krishna notices the affinity to do that, he personally enters within the heart and cleanses it. He cleanses it. So that's how we're going to save Earth now, by distributing Srimad Bhagavatam. That's the verse, 12, 13, 13. What's our call to action? What can we do? Take if you don't have it. Sponsor if you have it. Gift it if you have it. Or don't have it. Promote. We want to see this hall tomorrow filled up. I can't believe we had such a relishable talk today and just few of us. We've got to fill it. That's the first thing we can all do. Promote Bhagavatam, invite people, invite our friends, get everyone here, and then distribute. We wanted in this campaign, by the third day, I want everyone in this audience to take one box home. And when it sits in your lounge, Bhagavatam is going to say, distribute me, distribute me, distribute me. So everyone's going to walk out on the third day with one box of Bhagavatam. That's non-negotiable. Is that okay? This is one campaign we are running. It's called the Gram Vidyadhan campaign. Unfortunately, in India at the moment, we are losing our villages to various types of ideologies. It's happening, and it's happening pretty fast. I was just listening to Srila Prabhupada speak the other day. He was challenged. He said, Swamiji, your mission was to go to the West. Why are you coming and preaching in India now? And Prabhupada said, I've done my mission in the West. Now I've come back to save my motherland. And that's what's happening in India. We're losing India to various ideologies. We want to place Bhagavatam in various villages. And for only £99, you can even break it up into 3 payments if you want, £33 per month. You can sponsor a Bhagavatam, and we'll tell you the various, we've got the list of villages. We've got the devotees ready to go. All you have to do is sponsor one set. This is a video. Prabhu, can you play this, please? It's a very short video, 2 minutes.
A way to preserve the great wealth and legacy of India. What is the great wealth of India? It's knowledge, Sanatana Dharma, knowledge of our higher self, our eternal identity, and our relationship to the Supreme, and the knowledge
Hare Krishna. So that's our call to action, dear devotees. We have other calls to action, which we'll speak about tomorrow and on Sunday. But there's one you can take away. So I'll pause right here, and then we'll leave the rest for tomorrow. Thank you very much for coming. It was a pleasure having you here today. Thank you again, Radhika Raman Prabhu. Thank you, Niskinchan Prabhu and the School of Bhakti for pulling this event together. And thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
If you make your way from the right side, if you can see my hand, and at the back of the Seva Hall is Prasadam served. Thank you, everyone. See you all tomorrow. Not just yourself, but with your friends as well. Hare Krishna.
This one, we leave it as it is.